So hello everyone, and thank you for coming. My name is Kaylin. I'm the Panoramas coordinator for this school year, and this is our second Panoramas Roundtable discussion of the fall 2020 semester. For those of you who don't know, Panoramas is an online student-led publication dedicated to the news, research, culture, and art of Latin America, the Caribbean, and both Latinx and Caribbean diasporas. We'll be hosting roundtable discussions about every other week this semester, and the roundtables will be led mostly by our student interns working on their own research for Panoramas. For the full calendar of upcoming Panoramas roundtables, please like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date. And I'll post that in the chat as well. Today, Stephanie will be speaking about their op-ed, using Hispanic Heritage Month as a platform for change. And I will also send a link to the event in the chat, or to the op-ed in the chat. Stephanie is pursuing a BS in Environmental Science and a BA in Global and Popular Music, as well as certificates in Latin American Studies, GIS, and Sustainability. So before Stephanie begins, while Stephanie is presenting and during the discussion, please use the chat feature for any comments or reactions. And also, when you have something to say during the discussion, please use the raise hand feature, which you can find under the participants icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Stephanie, take it away.
Thank you very much. All right, yay, welcome to the second roundtable for the semester. As Killen said, my name is Stephanie Jimenez, and I'll be leading this discussion. So I was really inspired to write this article with my experiences, or because of my experience with faculty, staff, the Center for Latin American Studies, and other student organizations. Also by my experiences as past president and executive board member for the Latinx Student Association, which I will refer to as LSA, where I was one of the lead student organizers for the first and second annual Hispanic Heritage Month. So I have here on this slide just a little bit of background, just to kind of, I'm sure a lot of you read it while you were waiting here, but I write about it in the article. So if you have not read that yet, please go ahead after the, whenever you have time. So here's a brief outline. The highlighted in green will be the discussion questions. So while we're running through, I'll stop and we'll give you a chance to raise your hand and discuss. So basically running through all of these ideas to get to, what does HHM have to do with this institutional change that we, what could we be doing? So here's a rhetorical question that I want you all to think about throughout the presentation. Does this year's celebration, HHM celebration, promise a long-lasting collective recognition of the Latinx community at Pitt? So the argument in my op-ed is that Latinx people, issues, and cultures are worthy of more than a month-long diversity, equity, and inclusion exposition. I think that the current nomenclature and the objectives of HHM deter movements of solidarity, and I argue that HHM should fully, at least try to fully encompass all aspects of Latinidad, and that Pitt should be progressing HHM as a tool for institutional change. So first, let's take a look at the demographics at Pitt, just to see how small the Hispanic and Latino population is. And how accomplished we are in having developed such a strong network and a strong collaboration across disciplines and across cohorts. There's about 35,000 affiliates at Pitt's main campus, and undergraduates only make up 950 students, which is 5%, and everything's under 10% here. Just a side note, these numbers are very similar for the Black population at Pitt, and compared to the white population, that's about like 10,000 undergraduate students to 950 Hispanic. And then compared to the greater city of Pittsburgh community, not Allegheny County, the city of Pittsburgh, we've remained at about 3.1% of the population here. So Pitt's about the same, maybe doing a little bit better. So this is a small population here, but that obviously doesn't mean that we are less important or that we are less diverse, which brings me to terminology. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with these terms. If you're not, please go ahead and read this table. Terminology is really complicated, and there have been panels during Hispanic Heritage Month talking about this complexity, talking about how not everyone fits into these categories. So we really need to question whether Latinx actually does a good job of encompassing all of us. because Hispanic only refers to Spanish-speaking descendants, and from those countries, and it leaves out Brazilians, Haitians, and speakers of indigenous languages, among others, and that's really, that's no good. So, we have this term Latinx too that we can use to try and encompass all of that, but in reality, most Latino adults have not even heard of the term, or if they've heard of it, they don't even use it. So, there's that kind of weird, we can't really use Hispanic, not everyone identifies with that. Then we have Latinx, but does that include Afro-Latinos? So for the first discussion question, should Pitt change the name HHM to Latinx Heritage Month? So really, on the one hand, Pitt is doing a great job of having a comprehensive annual HHM celebrations that are really doing a great job of celebrating. But on the other, are we really recognizing all of our, all the people that are here at Pitt? Because Hispanic is not really recognizing all of that. And at the same time, Latinx is really complex and not everyone identifies with it. So, other universities are making the change. We have the University of Oregon, University of Michigan. I mean, probably at least one university in each state is starting to make the change. So I want to hear what you guys have to think about that. Oh, you can go ahead and raise your hand or just go ahead and unmute. Be the brave first person.
I have something, Stephanie, you're like an amazing speaker, first of all, but I was thinking earlier about how when you say Hispanic Heritage Month, you're kind of only acknowledging that like they have heritage that comes from Spain, but really Latin Americans have heritage that comes from indigenous people and African people too. So I also think it's limiting because of that reason.
Absolutely.
So I think a terminology change would be really good for that reason.
Yeah, it's a good point. Antonio?
I think you took the words right out of my mouth, Sophia. I really think that, personally, having learned oftentimes the history of where Hispanic even came from, a lot of these kind of labels are really put on these people, right? And Hispanic is definitely popularized in the US because of how many specifically Central Americans and Mexicans the US interacts with. And I think that's such a limiting view of what Latin America in general has to offer. I think it would benefit because of that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I do see, obviously, there's a huge pattern, especially in the US and Americans really viewing Latinos almost entirely as Mexican, and anybody who's Latino is just automatically pinned as that. So that's a good point. So I can give an example too. I found it very useful in LSA. When we were planning the first Hispanic Heritage Month kickoff festival, we were inviting other Latinx organizations to table the event. And so we actually had to question whether or not to invite Brazil nuts to the HHM festival. We were like, does it make any sense to invite a Brazilian club to a Hispanic, Heritage Month festival? And so it took up a lot of time to have to talk about that. But we, ended up being like, we're just going to redefine Hispanic Heritage Month for us, for our organization, as being Latinx inclusive. Manuel?
Hi. And, this is great. It's a great topic, and it's so great that it's framed right in the middle of the month celebration. And, in the midst of all that, we also need to be sure that we realize there's all these limitations, right? Hispanic Heritage Month is a federally recognized month since 1968. Well, it was a week, right? But then it became a month. And working within that framework is what I think may allow us in the long run to leverage for something that's more inclusive, not just in name, but overall, right? And so I think that what we need is these great ideas, right? Of how we should change it. I think we're all clear we need to change it, but we also need to be quite quite clear that we need a platform to make the change from. And so what's existing now is where we need to work from. So, you know, we also didn't mention Asian Latinos, right? Which is a growing population as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Grace, saw your hand up was next.
Yeah. The comment about like Belize nuts reminded me, I forget what exactly it was, but it's something with Hispanic Heritage Month, and I wanted to include Belize, and I think it's like their flag or something, and I think we were talking about, but are they like Hispanic or whatever? And I kind of was like, I don't really care. They're like literally right there between like Honduras and Mexico, and like I want to say underneath them is Guatemala, but like I think they're right there. They're our neighbors. Like they should. If they're, I go on like I think they should be here, whatever that means for the month or whatever. I think Belize needs to be here, and that also like reminds me like issues I have with like even like the Latin Grammys is how like how like indigenous languages of Latin America and Haitian Creole, which I think counts as indigenous languages, have to be like voted in for the music by like a board, not automatically accepted, despite the fact it's really framed as like a Latino award system, but it's clearly doesn't really care about Latin America.
Very, very true. My next article is about the Latin Grammys, so if you look, be on the lookout for that. Belkis?
Hi, everyone. I want to first thank Stephanie and the group for the invitation. It's fantastic to join this conversation, and I want to echo Manuel's spirit in saying that this is the right time to ask the right questions. And really what I'd like to do is just pose some more, if that's okay. I'm here today as Executive Director of Global Engagement at Pitt, but also as co-chair of the Hispanic Latino Professional Association at Pitt. My colleague and co-chair Doreen Hernandez is also here. And so this is a question that we've been grappling with as well. Do we change our name? And I think one of the things that we haven't talked about yet that's really important, I think, for a conversation like this is that from the very beginning in, the late 1960s, 1970s, when, the need to have a sort of umbrella term at the U.S. federal level in order to heed grassroots efforts that required the United States to include us in the census, and this is where Hispanic comes from, right? The need for an umbrella term at the federal level to count us on the census. There have been these really interesting and important debates about who we are and how we identify. From the beginning, we've resisted terms that have been imposed upon us by the federal government, Hispanic being the main one. And so there's no argument, I think, in this group and others that the term Hispanic is not inclusive enough, right? Where I think we need to struggle and grapple with when we're asking ourselves whether we identify as Latinos, Latinas, Latinas, Latinx, is that we have to remember, and when we ask ourselves questions about Brazil nuts and Belize, etc., is that this terminology is in spirit at least, meant to define a diasporic experience, and that is really crucial. That we are Latinos in a US context, right? Because outside of the United States, and especially within Latin America and the Caribbean, these signifiers don't make meaning. Right? They signify, they make meaning because we're in the United States and because we're a product of displacement, migration, exile. And so that's really important when you guys are asking yourselves these questions about Brazil nuts, Belize, et cetera, right? That it really has to do with a US context when we have this conversation, right? That's one question to ask ourselves, like, are we all on the same page there? The second is, right, and I included the link to support your statement, Stephanie, in the chat about,
thank you.
The fact that the Pew Research Center is showing us that the term Latinx right now is only sort of known by 3% of the US population and adopted by even less, right? And so the question to your beginning, your earlier point about, do we adopt Latinx because we are forward thinking and progressive and want to, within academia, sort of set a trend because we recognize and value the definition of the term, right? Or in adopting the term, are we also, to Manuel's earlier point, having to adopt a caveat that explains how we know that this term is also problematic in its own way in that it hasn't been sort of adopted, right? These are questions that we need to grapple with as we think about this holistic question about, do we change the name, right? Are we aware of what the change implies?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great points. And actually, that's a really good segue onto the next. I'm going to move on. Sorry about Antonio and Cameron. There's a discussion question coming up really soon. So this is just, I'm not going to go into too detail about this. This is a whole other, presentation, but a lot of people also reject it. So not only do a lot of Latino adults not understand the term, or, like you said, it's contextual, may not identify with it because it's, only in the US, and a lot of, thinking about like my dad, he doesn't really identify like that because he's he immigrated here, and it's just not the same. Some people, argue that it's too Americanized, it has too much to do with the US, like, it's a bureaucratic term, it's used to like be a pan-ethnic thing. So they think it's just too difficult to pronounce, and, why bother with it? The other thing would be that it erases Afro-Latinidad and indigenous populations from Latin America, because we have to remember Latin America is a geographic determination. There's very hard to find like very strong links between our countries and our our cultures and such. So the only thing about this argument is that I don't really know if it's about blood quantum, as the poster suggests, or is it about our our colonial history, or is it about the US and Latin American relations? So it is important to think about whether or not, even if we did adopt Latinx, we're actually including the Black and indigenous people. So that brings me to this, whatever we do with the month and whether we change the name, how are we centering these populations? So Grace, I see you have your hand up.
I just have a question. Are we arguing that like Latinx erases these populations and Asian Latin Americans in a way that Latino doesn't? Because I don't really understand how like Latinx would erase them more than the like already like existing ideas of what it means to be Latin American or Latino or Hispanic or Mexican would. Like when people think of what it means to be Mexican, people just think of like mestizos. They don't think about the Asians or the Black or the indigenous, or like they think about the indigenous in really antiquated ways. So it's like I don't see what additional erasure is being done, or at least it's not apparent to me.
Yeah, actually, I don't have the answer because I didn't, again, my paper wasn't exactly on, in that direction. But it is a very interesting argument, and it is confusing because, like you said, if you then identify with your country, is that not, continue on the same idea of like this continued erasure? What about, being, mixed, being part European and of African descent or indigenous? What is the point of having those distinctions? I think it is a very interesting argument. But Manuel?
Sorry, I had trouble unmuting. And let me put the question a little bit differently here. So when we say, Hispanic or Latino or Latinx, when we are celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, what are we celebrating really? Who are we celebrating? Is it just what the name implies, or are we actually trying to put into this, and if you've spoken to me about this before, what the circus tent analogy that I use is. It the circus tent where we try and fit everybody in, or are we actually trying to see that the circus tent was put there by somebody else upon a whole bunch of people, right? So the question would be, so when we say that, who are we celebrating? Are we gonna try and atomize and recognize everyone? Are we trying to put too many people in the same place? What is it, that we're really asking to celebrate with Hispanic Heritage Month?
Yeah, very, very good points. Evelyn?
Hi, thanks, Steph.
So I think that it's important to recognize how the terminology is very unique to the United States, because I have a lot of friends that live in Latin American countries, and they say that the discourses that they're having are very different, and the deconstruction that they're going through is very different, not only because they might be using the Spanish language, but just the historical factors are different. So understanding the history of a country can understand what groups are particularly marginalized and whether, you know, certain groups are just completely erased. And I think that if we look at it from an American standpoint, there's a tendency to try to like, group everyone together to kind of just make it like one big collective struggle and then forget about, you know, individual categories within, you know, the big umbrella, right? Mm-hmm. So like a common example is like transgender individuals, right? To be trans just means you're not, but there's so many other identities that fall under that umbrella, but there's not a, you know, common understanding of all of them. And that's a problem where you tend to erase by generalizing or by making this kind of like monolithic whole. And that can be dangerous, but it can also be important and necessary, especially from the legal standpoint, right? In order to grant rights and to prevent discrimination, it's important to kind of know what people are being targeted or what people are on the margins. But I just think intersectionality is super important and kind of at the core of understanding whether or not a title change is necessary, like looking forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what, that makes me think of, you know, Afro-Latino. The term isn't recognized by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary or the Oxford English Dictionary. And, you know, those are things that academia, we rely on those. And there is a petition online if you want to sign that to get that, you know, officially on there. And so like you said about intersectionality, we should make sure that, you know, when we're celebrating Latinx Heritage Month, if it becomes Latinx Heritage Month, that we make sure that we allow for, you know, even more subgenres for people to have that space, because we know that, you know, if we have Latinx, there are people like Afro-Latinos who are being left out predominantly out of that discussion. But to allow for, you know, people to choose to go in those directions, I think is a good thing. Juliana?
The current president of LSA, I will say, working with this like in person and doing the work to try to have the recognition be placed on Afro-Latinx populations. I've seen that though it could be like, we could change the name, yes, but the greatest issue is trying to navigate not only like ignorance, but also very strong opinions about certain things regarding how we identify. I've seen where maybe talking about Afro-Latinidad has made people like, maybe not, like maybe that's too limiting. Let's do something else. Let's try this. And I know we've received certain hate speech, certain things last year from just trying to bring up that Black people exist in these spaces. And so it's not only a thing that needs to be like recognized on a greater level, but more of an internal reflection, because I know a lot of people just are not willing to budge on it. So yeah, racism is crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Antonio, and then I'm gonna move on with the presentation.
Yeah, excellent points, Ashley. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what Manuel and Evelyn kind of covered on. I just think it's super important that, I mean, you're right, like, why are we celebrating this month to begin with? And why do we, as Hispanics, as Latinos or whatever in the US, feel the need to like group ourselves with other people from Latin America? While like if you're in, say, like some country in Latin America itself, Latin American people themselves don't do that, right? It's just they think of themselves as like, oh, I'm Mexican, I'm Cuban or whatever. And like, that's pretty much the end of that, right? And there's definitely some work being done, especially in academic circles, where like, oh, people are starting to realize that like anti-Blackness exists, like in systems in Latin America, right? Stuff like racism exists in Latin America, right? And they're trying to break that down themselves. But I think the word itself, Latinx, obviously, in the Hispanic Heritage Month in general, you know, it's like, it starts with the independence of like these Central American countries, and then it ends on Christopher Columbus Day, like near Christopher Columbus Day. It's like, what does Christopher Columbus have to do? Like, okay, I honestly think, given that the U.S. is sort of like this imperial country that has kind of invaded all of Latin America, obviously people here are going to think of Latin America as this like conglomerate of people, right? When the reality is that these people are all like very individual, and yes, they share like a common ancestry and history, but they're all super separate, right? And I think it's so limiting, and it doesn't usually include like Black people or Indigenous people or Asian people. Yeah, that's it.
Absolutely. Okay. Moving on to, okay, so we have all these things that we have to address, and HHM, needs to start taking on these, and I think that Pitt's doing a really great job of that. With all the discussions that are happening, all the events that are happening, I think, like, applaud to anybody who's involved in that and planning, LSA, and I see a few of you here. So HHM, this is what I think. I think HHM and how the university uses HHM is the connection to how we can change the culture about how we use Latinx, and Afro-Latino, how we bring up these discussions for celebrating, but also really trying to recognize, all of us. And I think that the university, there are a handful of ways that the university can really do this. So just highlighting a handful of the educational measurements of success here, Gina Garcia talks a lot about this in her book, and I really suggest people reading this to learn more about what it means to be Latinx serving, and that it doesn't necessarily you don't need to be a federally recognized university in order to do that. So basically, the opportunity gap is continued through things like the SAT and ACT scores, standardized tests, admission selectivity, persistence rates, and there's so many other things that have to continue that opportunity gap. So when we think about being Latinx serving and being able to kind of mitigate the effects of the opportunity gap, Latinx serving, it's an agenda that universities can incorporate, to help Latinx students, faculty, and staff mitigate their systematic situation. So Latinx isn't just about being from Latin America, like we heard in this discussion that we just had. It's so much more complex than that. And what are we actually celebrating with Hispanic Heritage Month? But it's actually about the intersections of all these things that are here. Being low income, being immigrants, being first generation, LGBT, you name it. So we really need to be bringing that to the forefront of celebrating Latinidad, I think, and that's what Hispanic Heritage Month should be talking about and should be focusing on. Putting these policies into the universities, there's a lot of pushback. Being racially and ethnically conscious is usually, people will say it's exclusionary. Oh, I don't see color. Why are you being so specific on, who you're paying, who you're giving financial aid to, or if there's a Latinx resource center, why would you do that? Why can't they just go to the regular resource center? So, there's our identities and our experiences are very specific for everybody. And I think that it's not really about redirecting resources to one particular group. It's about adding to the total that a university offers. So I'm actually going to skip this next one and include it into the next slide here. So thinking about those pushbacks, have you experienced any of those kinds of pushbacks to thinking about racially conscious things? I know, Ashley, you started talking about how, you had people who were being outwardly racist when you were talking about Afro-Latinos, and how could the university better serve you, with your college experience? What are some things that could help you? So I saw Doreen raise their hand first.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for hosting this activity. I am thrilled to be here with Belkis and Manuel and all of you. I just wanted to add that I wanted to clarify, maybe, I don't know how else to put it, but Hispanic Heritage Month was created by a committee of people that's led by Gina Garcia, but it truly is not something that Pitt came to us and said, okay, now you're going to spearhead this committee and you're going to throw all these wonderful activities and we're going to support you financially and et cetera, et cetera. We really, truly do not have the support from the administration. Just like everybody else, we had to place a request for the chancellor to participate in any of our activities. The welcome activity was sort of months and months ahead of time of writing and asking the support from the administration. The Office of Diversity and Inclusion is part of our committee, but they've never offered financial support. In reality, we have zero financial support from anyone at the University of Pittsburgh. And it is truly the work of a lot of us, many people of us who work after hours, on the weekends, et cetera, to put all of the activities that you've been seeing. And these questions that you're asking were at the very beginning, at the top of our priorities. Why is this called like this? How do we fix it? How do we make it more inclusive? How do we make the language clearer? And so I really appreciate you creating this event around all of these questions, because they're exactly what we've been battling the entire time. And to be honest with you, I was actually a little bit disappointed that the only activity that we were able to get the chancellor to participate with us in, and it was by request, was the welcome reception. And we have not seen any other administration, despite the chancellor saying that he has, his very fond memories of his undergraduate college experience. It was wonderful that he was there, but I thanked him. I sent him an email, and I never received a response. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because I think that, yes, to continue the conversation, we're going to have to get the support, but we're going to have to be the change makers. What you're doing right now is exactly what we need to continue to do to make it happen.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's exactly, that's what inspired me. Yes. Cameron.
Firstly, I want to say thank you so much for inviting me to this Panoramas. I really do appreciate this opportunity to be able to speak. Of course, my name is Cameron Clark. I'm the current president of the Pan-Caribbean Alliance, but also something about me. Over this past summer, I was on the team with other Black students to send a list of demands to the university to ask for change within the institution. And I guess I could go a little bit more about that later on. However, I believe with this question alone, how could Pitt better serve you, or how could Pitt better serve your community? Something that I look at is, I believe that the Latinx community, not only within the university, but also within the city itself, is not talked about enough. Yeah. I do not for a second believe it's talked about enough, especially considering everything that I just heard about the initial start of Hispanic Heritage Month and with the chancellor. It should not be a thing where the chancellor doesn't put in the effort to recognize a group of students. At least I do not believe so, especially this group of students that / this growing community. And I'm definitely going to say growing, because let's face it, the Latinx community here is growing. There should be more effort put to bring up the Latinx community and what you all go through, what you all have had to work through. It needs to be talked about a lot more. And I think that's something that would definitely help more in the long run. I believe that would definitely help more in the long run, especially when I look back to what happened with the Black community. It wasn't just a spur of the moment thing that caused us to send these list of demands. It was more so just a buildup. I wouldn't even say slow buildup, but adding on more and more and more stressors and taxations on us. And then, of course, with everything happening with the tragic killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and the list goes on and on, as we've heard and seen. At that moment, we said enough was enough, and we asked for change. because we knew change needed to occur for our community. And I believe, in essence, y'all's community needs to be talked about a lot more. It needs to, especially within the institution itself.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Juliana. Wait, I cannot hear you. Try again. Oh, wait. Okay, we'll move on to Manuel.
No, nothing.
Oh wait, no.
Oh, great. Okay, I'm so sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Things. The first being, I feel like Pitt should have an academic financial literacy program for first generation students, because I know myself and a lot of other people, not even just in the Latinx community, just in the immigrant community here at Pitt, a lot of students have a really difficult time not only applying to colleges, but then navigating how to afford them from there on. And I know big institutions like Pitt definitely capitalize off of students. They want to get your money, but students, especially first generation students, can't necessarily afford that. And there should be a program to help students navigate helping themselves be able to afford their education. And then the second thing that I wanted to say is there should be a change in policing at events for like cultural, ethnic, racial clubs and groups. Because you look at some of the clubs that are like predominantly white, and you don't see nearly as much of a police presence. And I know like the Black and Indigenous people of color here at the university already do not have a great relationship. Like they don't feel comfortable with police presence, and by having them infiltrate on clubs and events that are supposed to be helpful to us in our education is really damaging. So that's a different thing. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Manuel?
There's some great points being made here. And I sort of want to bring it back to the polemic aspect of, here we are, and we're celebrating one of 12 months, right? For a whole bunch of people. And in some ways, much like this recognition, this being granted a month for, African-American history or whatever, there's a certain tokenism aspect to it, right? It's, okay, we'll give you this and you'll be happy. You should be happy with that. And so I want to bring it back to that idea of, who is this? Who are we, and what are we trying to do? And then also to reiterate this idea, this is what we build on. This is the opportunity that we use to build upon. So we get to those places where, we're not talking about a month for a whole bunch of people that may or may not have a lot in common other than maybe geography. And that may be focused in the US, but whose histories are so different. So it may be, two things to think about in the framework of Hispanic Heritage Month. It's an opportunity to build, I think, and the doors being open, and your work and these discussions, this is what makes that awareness, and it's our job now to advocate internally amongst not just us, but everybody we come in contact with to make this happen.
Absolutely. And for, more specific ways to do that, if you notice, I put up these little colorful boxes of this is part of Garcia's framework. And these are very, general suggestions of, the types of things that we should institutionally be changing, to target the needs of Latinx students. And these very much align with Black Senate's demands, which I'll get to in a second, but I'll let Grace go ahead.
I also kind of feel like one suggestion I like is when talking about preserving polylingualism. It's because I know I had a teacher who's Mexican who was kind of disappointed for in the school, not really having language programs aimed at like heritage speakers. Especially because like in like my class, like sometimes people like will stay after, and like it's either people who have like experiences with Spanish as a first language, but maybe didn't use it like in educational purposes, or like maybe someone like me where your parent is from the country and like you have experiences with the language but you're not actually fluent in it. And she was talking like you guys shouldn't be in like classes aimed at people who have never learned Spanish. You should be in language courses aimed specifically at people who've grown up with or around Spanish, or like Portuguese or Creole or whatever. And I also do kind of think it's, I don't know, I've never like considered saying like I'm like Latina and then being like that means I have everything in common with everyone. If anything, for me it's been like either like solidarity or whatever, which is why like when we were talking about Belize, I was kind of like I don't care about Spain, I want Belize on the map. But like or like I don't really think I know anything that much about like I think I have a very limited information knowledge about South America, but I know like reading things like the Open Veins of Latin America and like Gustavo Gutierrez and like a lot of like Brazilian liberation theologies have been really essential to my understanding of like Latin America and like what I want for the future.
Yeah.
So like I don't know. So sometimes when it talks about like I also kind of feel like framing these months as tokenisms, I kind of feel like it sometimes decontextualizes why they were demanded for. And like because like I think the people you're demanding it from are always never going to like take it that seriously, because otherwise you wouldn't have to make them give it to you. But I also like think that kind of like I don't know, sometimes like, yes I can always do more, which I always think how we can be better, but I kind of feel like it discredits why people wanted them in the first place to be like it's just a token, when it's just like it's not a token because of like what exists, it's a token because the people you demanded of don't want to change.
Yeah, I've never thought about it that way. That's a very good point. So to look more specifically at, what can the university be doing? I want to look at just the highlights of Pitt's Black Senate's demands. You can find these online. BIS has a link on their website. They have a link tree for it on their Instagram. So I'm not necessarily suggesting that, we as Latinx should be copying, Pitt Black Senate's demands, but I think that it's a great example, a great framework, a great, many things overlap, but not everything overlaps. That it's a great starting point for looking at how the intersections of our college experience, can be changed. So I'm not going to run through these, but just take a second to look at them. These are the major categories that the list of demands were built off of, and I highlighted ones that were similar to Garcia's framework or similar to conversations that I've had with other Latinx students, things that we've talked about as being important for us in our experience. So Karen, I don't know if you have anything you want to add in particular to this.
Yeah, of course. I guess because as we see, you touch upon the highlights of these demands, right? And as I stated earlier, it wasn't like a spur of the moment thing, but it was more so buildup of different occurrences that happened at the university that we had noticed throughout our college experience. With that, I do know some of the demands have been implemented or are in the process of being put into place. Including they are currently working on the People's Voice Committee / Black Advocacy Council, and they're creating different avenues to try and increase Black faculty within the university. And there are other things, of course, that they are working on to combat the systemic racism within university setting that we find countless times throughout different universities within the country. Within that, I could also give an example of how we kind of worked on it / did everything, so to speak. After the tragic killings of George Floyd, myself and a couple others realized something needed to change, or more so, we realized that in essence, enough was enough.
Yeah.
And that stuff truly didn't need to change for the betterment or a better experience for at least Black students within our community. And so we went to, at first, Dr. Bonner, Dean Bonner, and talked to him about it. And then that led us to meet with the chancellor and talk to him. And then within that, so during that whole process, we started coming up with, okay, what would we like to see different within the university setting? What would we like to see to help us within this university? And so, as you see, we came up with this whole list of different things that we want to implement and change. And it was a whole process, including like different committees and different ideas being spread and asked and questioned, and even a way to make sure that the university would be able to hold up to these demands, hold up to what we want change for the better. As you see with the Black advocacy, sorry, a little bit tongue-tied, been running through a couple meetings today. As you see with the Black Advocacy Council, as well as, of course, the People's Voice Committee. And then we sent the list to not only the university, but also Pitt News, but also everywhere we could, so to speak.
It's done.
Yeah, it was definitely something very interesting, to say the least. Very interesting experience. And so then we talked more with the university to start implementing changes, as also the university started making changes on their own, as they, I believe something, before I finish up, I'm trying not to I know I tend to ramble, so I'm deeply sorry, but I think something that's kind of happened within the summers that, especially due to people being in this restricted environment due to the pandemic, we've had to come to terms with a lot of different things that occurs within America and occurs due to the systemic racism within America, and on all these different levels and all these different niches within our life. And I believe within that, we see the university also started to come to terms with this. Because as we were stating / working on these different things, the university was also working on these things from our initial meeting. Mm-hmm. Some a little bit different than what you see, because some of these are definitely a bit more up there than others, so to speak.
Yeah.
But to kind of tie this into this Panoramas, I feel as though the university is trying to implement changes for the betterment of students. Because at the end of the day, the main thing for universities is the undergraduate population / students itself. And I think something that sometimes happens is that we tend to forget who are the students, what are the different communities within the student body, as they push forward and try and do this, that, and the third. And as I was saying earlier, I believe there needs to be a further understanding that not only do Black communities, not only are Black communities affected, they're definitely affected by a lot of problems, but also you have to look at the Latinx communities. You have to look at the international students and the problems that they have faced. And I think that that's something that the university needs to start looking at more, and needs to look into themselves to figure out what needs to occur. Just as we need to tell them occasionally, this is the problems and this is the difficulties that we face.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. I think that HHM hopefully, becomes that opportunity for us to keep reminding the university, like you said, maybe they're already talking about these things very maybe not as much as we'd like them to, but if we start that initial meeting, then it becomes something that they can return to, and that we can push them to return to. And that's what I'm hoping. That's what I'm hoping that HHM can become. It's very hard for us to, recognize all of Latinos and celebrate all of us, like Manuel said. It's just a month, how do we fit everyone in? But to get those conversations started, then, from the entire year will become this celebration, this recognition. Belkis?
So I have a comment and then a question for the group. My comment is really to commend Cameron and the rest of the student body for the courage and the conviction to do what they've been doing for so long, and then to come and share this with other groups as best practices. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of commitment, not just to the platform that you're advancing, but to diversity, equity, and inclusion across the university. And so thank you, Cameron, for that. I think this group needs to understand the power that you wield as students. I'm going to say that again. You wield enormous power as students, and I would encourage you to think about that very carefully, because it's something that the rest of us don't have. And so you have a voice and a platform that you need to be able to understand and witness when other student groups sort of use it and leverage it for good, and sort of learn from that experience. And so thanks again, Cameron, for being here. The question that I have for this group is the extent to which you actually feel your voice and your sense of self and identity represented in the strides that Pitt has made, admittedly, over the past few months in advancing their commitment to diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism. They've set up a website that lists all of the sort of initiatives and objectives that are coming up, and I'll share that in the chat in a second. My question to this group is, do you feel yourself included in those efforts, and why and why not? Because I'd be curious to hear from folks on that point.
Well, for me personally, I don't feel, very included. And that's kind of why I was interested in reading Gina Garcia's book, why I was interested in writing this article. I actually see a lot of, the demands for Pitt Black Senate. A lot of them can be translated and catered for the Latinx community and the Afro-Latinx community and things like that. I wish that these things that were curated, by the Pitt Black Senate were more prioritized for everyone, and those are the things that I wish the university would do, so that's why I chose to go in this direction. Luz?
Hi, Belkis, can you hear me? Yes?
Yeah, I can hear you, Luz. Hi.
No, Belkis made the same point I was going to make, and that's one thing that we underestimate is the power of the undergraduate students, and it's something that we need to explore, not just as Latinx, Latino, whichever name we have, but as a student of Pitt. Undergraduates need to understand and see that we're here because of them. Professors get to do research because of them. We get to have our jobs because of all the students. So Belkis said it better than I could have said it, and it's the power that you guys need to realize that you have and the changes that you can make. I came to Pitt in the late 90s, early 2000s to finish. And I didn't know about the Center for Latin American Studies. I didn't know any other Latinos. And this is back, 20 years now. And I had a professor tell me that I shouldn't be in her class because I will confuse the other students if they were born in the United States and were learning Spanish, because I was a native to her, a native speaker, but she never took the time to speak to me and find out that I came here when I was 14. So I'm in the middle of being in school in Colombia and coming to United States. And then I was surprised, but at the same time, I went to her and said, why would you say that to the students? Because she didn't think the students would tell me what she just say. So I confronted her because to me, that was one wrong information to give to another fellow student. And for her to never take the time to come and speak to me about it. She just made the comment general. So you guys have a chance to change a lot, and little steps have been taken. And as you guys speak and talk about the celebration for a month, and it's like everything starts with one step. So that step is being taken. And I'm more for my birthday's the whole year, Mother's Day is every day, but what are we going to do next? Because we will have this discussion next year again. So what is the plan? Because we started to talk about it, what's next? And honestly, the undergraduates and graduate students, you guys have more power than you will ever even imagine that you have. And as an alum of Pitt, I'm seen as an employee. And I always complain about this because if I worked in Harvard or somewhere else and had the same job, I would be viewed differently as an alum. So we need to see that also for the staff, is how are we valued within the university or how we see ourselves. So to me, there's more steps, and my question will be like, what are you guys seeing yourself? Because you guys are the young generation, you're sort of the future, and we're here to help you. How can we work together to get things better? But don't ever doubt the power you have as a student and as a person.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we are coming close to the end. Actually, I think we've gone over a minute. So, I mean, honestly, Belkis and Luz, you really summarized what I was trying to end on, which was that, you know, HHM is extremely popular now, and Pitt is starting to really, like you said, it was a Latinx coalition, basically, that started the HHM committee, and were the ones who were pushing the university to talk about these issues. And the university has taken pretty well to that. And so I think that we should continue these conversations. You know, this is only the tip of the iceberg, and that use each month to kind of move Hispanic Heritage Month from being a spotlight to actually being, you know, a seat at the table. And thank you, you know, Belkis and Luz, for pointing out that students do have a lot of power, and we can see, you know, from Pitt Black Senate, they really started the ball rolling on that with the university, and I think that's amazing. I guess people are free to leave now that the thing, I mean, you're free to leave whenever, but it is, I guess, officially over. But I guess Juliana and Antonio, if you have any final remarks for this. So Juliana. I don't know if you're muted.
I can go first because actually I have to go for a meeting really quickly. I just wanted to say really quickly for the students that are still here, that yeah, this is, I think, thank you so much, Dr. Torres and Luz, for commenting that, because you're so right that the students definitely have power. I just think oftentimes it's really difficult for students to kind of collectively think together, right? It's difficult because we're only here for 4 years, right? And this school way too often does not want us to have these sort of thoughts together, because they're honestly afraid of certain consequences because of that. And we kind of need people in positions that can help collectivize, you know, these ideas, right? And I think that's why groups like the Pan-Caribbean Alliance are super important, groups like LSA are super important, group like SHIP, right? But even like bigger groups too, like SGB, I'm actually involved in the committee and the Diversity and Inclusion Committee of SGB, and they do a lot of great work. We're trying to start this new series that is like specifically for like town halls, where we try to address issues that are going on within the university, right? And we'll have a moderator, right? And our goal is to have like an admin, like front and center, and, you know, just have students like ask them questions, because I don't think people get that opportunity to do that, right? And yeah, so I really encourage everybody to like reach out, go to your SGB, like every Tuesday they have these like meetings where to discuss certain things, and they have an open floor where people can like input decisions, right? Or just get involved if you want to help as well, because I think that's definitely one of the most direct ways to do that. I mean, it's not the only way, but it definitely helps.
Thank you. Yeah, they definitely don't advertise that enough. And I don't know if that's like a new feature, but if it, I don't know, just definitely check out that website. Because like you were saying, we have a lot of power, and those are the ways. And I think that's really great that SGB does have that, have those meetings public and those town halls public, and diversity inclusion have those things public. So that's definitely good to know. Juliana, or if we just, does your mic work? One last thing, and then I guess anything else can be put in the chat or no?
You cannot hear us.
I can hear you now.
Okay, great.
I was just gonna say, I think the takeaway of all of this, especially having the knowledge that we have now and prior to this, is that we should be aware, we should be self-aware, and be intentional of who you surround yourself with, who you support, diversify your feeds, all the information you consume on a day-to-day basis. And yeah, be mindful of the populations that are often disenfranchised in this Eurocentric society we live in. So yes, thank you.
Thank you. If no one else has anything to add, thank you for all the virtual applause.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and thank you all to who contributed. Like, this was an incredible discussion. You know, it keeps getting better and better, all of our Panoramas Roundtable discussions, and the conversation isn't over, right? So I hope that this conversation and discussion and Stephanie's presentation made you feel motivated to enact change and use your voice. And just wanted to, again, thank you to all. And Panoramas is still on a brief hiatus. Our website isn't up yet, but it will be up soon. So stay tuned. And in order to keep in touch with our articles and our roundtables, please follow us on all the social medias and subscribe to our newsletter. I can drop those links again if you'd like. Yeah, so hopefully see you at our next roundtable. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.